Welcome back. You are listening to Through a Glass Darkly Radio on United Public Radio. It's great to see everyone today. The intro music was Mark of the Doomslayer by Karl Casey at White Bat Audio. And today I have another amazing guest that I'm going to introduce you to. His name is Tom Montalk. He is a fellow truth seeker on a quest to expose the dark and empower the light. His primary goal is to help others arm themselves with knowledge to better fulfill their evolutionary potential. After studying physics and electrical engineering for 4 years, he left college to pursue more independent research. His interests include spirituality, alienology, alchemy, Gnosticism, and Hermeticism, quantum and scalar physics, experiments, forbidden history, military tactics, and composing symphonic and epic doom metal. His true passions are science and music. Tom and his girlfriend currently live in Florida. Tom, welcome.
Thanks for having me on.
It's an absolute pleasure. I'm sure this was much anticipated. You have a lot of fans, I can tell from some of the episodes that we did recently, or at least this past week on Through a Glass Darkly, the YouTube channel. So, all right, today we're talking, I think the title of this is about escaping base reality, and it's hopefully going to be about so much more. So let's kind of go all the way back if we're talking about kind of what we see as reality and start unpacking the layers based on, I think you have like 2 decades or more of research on this and trying to understand kind of the nature of reality around us. Explain this concept of the dark state, not the deep state, but the dark state.
So I think a lot of people are familiar with the deep state concept, which is that there are elements within our government which are not elected. And when we have presidents that change over every 4 years or every 8 years, this deep state stays in the background and they maintain sort of continuity of structure. Okay. Now, some of these guys are not very ethical. They collude amongst themselves and they cause a lot of problems for the world and society at large. Okay. But you see, that is still all surface level because the people that do comprise the deep state, they go home to their suburban neighborhoods or their apartment buildings and they drive to work and they live a relatively normal life, which is not the same thing as the dark state, which is almost as something that Richard Dolan would call the breakaway civilization. In other words, these are people that live and operate by the rules of the deepest, darkest of the military projects, black programs, gray programs, even things beyond that. And they spend a lot of their time in these very secret facilities. A lot of them are underground, so deep underground military bases. Some claim that some are even off-world, some sort of a non-public space program. And this dark state, they are even more clandestine and even more organized and intelligent and technologically advanced than the deep state could ever imagine it could ever be. So here we're actually talking about almost like a parallel civilization comprised pretty much of humans like you and me. However, their culture, the way that they think, the technology that they have, it is as if they are time travelers from centuries in the future because they are that advanced and that far-ranging in their plans. So this dark state, we have to keep in mind as being separate from the deep state and actually being one level down beneath it, and possibly even using the deep state and the surface level government as their instruments or puppets to wage various proxy wars amongst one another. And this is all stuff that we would see in the news but not realize has a very deep and dark origin.
Now, how did you come to this conclusion in terms of the sources that you've analyzed to learn about the existence of this quote unquote parallel civilization or dark state?
So one of my origin points was actually as an alien abductee. So I had a number of paranormal experiences when I was a kid, including what you would call alien abductions, classic gray aliens and cobalt blue suits coming in to grab me when I was only 2, 3, 4 years old. And this happened over and over again at the time. So by the time I was in my early teens, I decided to start researching what could be behind this, like what's actually going on there. And so when I started reading all the books that I could find at my local library on ufology and abductions and even spirituality and metaphysics to kind of broaden my horizons, one of the things that I stumbled upon was the idea of MILABs, meaning military abductions. In other words, it wasn't necessarily aliens that were taking certain people. In some cases, it could actually be secret, dark military projects that are abducting people, taking them to these underground bases, and doing things to them for mind control purposes or experimentation or psychic remote viewing, things like that. Okay. Some very advanced projects that probe the very limits of what human consciousness is capable of. So this field of military abductions, when you start looking into all the hundreds of cases out there. Now, just as a side note, because I've been on the internet since the 90s and I've had a website presence, I've had a lot of people, researchers and experiencers and ordinary people alike, contact me to share with me their data, their experiences, their questions. And so I've been collaborating with tens of thousands of people over these years to try to put the pieces together of what's going on. And so this whole military abduction thing, that was one component of it. So when I talk about what led me to it, it wasn't just my alien experiences. It wasn't just the books that I read in the library. It was also these people that I communicated with who shared with me privately their experiences, which they couldn't explain, but me, because I had a background in this field, I'd be like, oh yeah, of course. I mean, that's what that is probably, because it matches a pattern, right? So I was confronted with this issue where how is it that you can have humans, people, okay, with alien-like technology where they can literally open some sort of a wormhole, space-time portal into your bedroom and take you out into an underground base, which could be hundreds of miles away. This has been reported so many times, especially with the people that I've talked to. So, it made me realize that there is a component to, I don't even know if we would call it the government or the military, because they might be operating completely outside of that. It could be done through corporations or private think tanks or, some sort of parallel thing that's not even necessarily our men and women in uniform, right? So I'm not disparaging the ones that serve society that way. I'm not disparaging our civil servants. I'm talking about a kind of breakaway, renegade, maverick group of people that have extremely advanced technology and extremely advanced intellectual knowledge and intelligence, like military intelligence that goes beyond anything that, even our CIA would have. So that is what I would consider the dark state. And I got into it basically because of my abduction experiences and trying to figure out what was really going on with it. So when I was looking into the whole alien topic, the human component showed up as well. So sometimes, an abductee gets taken by an alien earlier in the night, and then later on, that very same night, they get re-abducted. It's called a re-abduction. They get re-abducted by humans in uniforms and taken to clearly like human military underground bases. Now, in some rare cases, but this does happen quite a bit actually, abductees report being in one of these underground bases where there's both humans and non-humans working side by side. Now, that's shocking to most people to think that, because normally we think, okay, well, if there are aliens and maybe they're flying around and doing what they do, and then if there's like a secret government stuff, then they're doing what they do. But rarely do we ever think about any sort of collaboration or joint programs between the two. But I have known a number of people and researchers alike who do believe in this idea that there is some degree of collusion between certain non-human alien factions and certain human, I guess, renegade black ops, dark state stuff going on. So we do have to take that into consideration.
When do you think this bifurcation happened? And by bifurcation, I mean from the surface portion of, let's call it the iceberg, right, of human civilization. When did the kind of the below surface level piece, because you mentioned it's so far advanced, it's almost as if they're time travelers. When did that bifurcation happen in your, based on your research?
So the way that I picture it is that we had different advanced streams, different independent advanced streams coming together into this behemoth that we call the dark state. Okay. Now, I do think that one of those streams is probably during the late 1800s after James Maxwell discovered the theory of electrodynamics, and they were experimenting with radio waves and X-rays and, just starting to really get into the more technologically advanced stuff. Because prior to that, I mean, what did they have? They had steam power, coal power, horses and horse-drawn carts. But once electricity was discovered, that kind of opened the door to many different things. Now, in the late 1800s, in the 1890s, there was a spate of UFO sightings called the mystery airship sightings of 1893. And a lot of people reported how there were these Zeppelin, these blimp-shaped objects that were going through the sky. They had little propellers on them,
Mhm.
and sometimes they would land in a
And this
field.
is before Zeppelins existed, right? Or
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it was during the
right
very
on the edge, right?
yeah, right. It was like several years before that. So if you were back in that time period and you told anyone on the ground, like, someone in public, like, hey, I saw this oblong ovoid shaped object, they wouldn't know what you're talking about because Zeppelins had not been in use yet by that point. So it's kind of like the black ops of their time. And what that tells me is, so sometimes these crafts would land and someone would come out looking totally normal, like any one of us, and even ask one of the local farmers or something, hey, can you mail this package for me? Or something like that. So there's interaction between the occupants of these mystery airships and people on the ground. And from all of those reports, it seems to me that they were not alien, they were human, but they were humans with advanced technology. So some sort of a secret private research group that was conducting experiments in advanced technologies at the time. Now, what I believe happened is that back when electrodynamic theory from James Clerk Maxwell, back when it was discovered, Maxwell on purpose, or maybe not, maybe he was led into it, he chopped out a big part of that theory. And the result of it was kind of like a handicapped version, and that's what we know nowadays as a theory of electromagnetism. However, if you add that chopped out part back in, then that starts opening the door to gravity manipulation, time manipulation, space-time stuff. So he was right on the edge of it, but decided not to go through that door. And unfortunately, that's why our public sciences right now, that's why we don't have flying cars, why we still rely on oil and gas, natural gas and all these fossil fuels to power most of our power grid, is because that part of science has been chopped out even as early as the late 1800s. However, I do believe that there were certain groups, certain people that realized that there was a secret door to his theory, and they went through it and they started to apply these additional facets of it in order to manipulate gravity. So some of these ships, I don't think they were just blimps filled with helium or hydrogen or something back in those days. I do believe that they're using some sort of anti-gravity technology. So this was very early on. And another thing you have to keep in mind is that even during that time period, even centuries prior, there was various types of secret societies, including the Rosicrucians, which
Mhm.
publicly they became known in the early 1600s as being a kind of secret society that was benevolent, but they had alchemical technology. They were psychics. They were advanced for their time. Okay, it's almost like they were alien. All right. Well, that was in the 1600s. So you can imagine if they continued the research, if they kept on going more and more centuries, who knows what they were like by the 1800s? Maybe by that point they did have these flying ovoid things. And even nowadays, when people report seeing UFOs, sometimes they report seeing cigar-shaped objects, which is exactly what those mystery airship vehicles were back in the
Mhm.
1890s. So it's not like it's not like. See, some people theorize that aliens they're not even alien. They're just some sort of a mysterious phenomenon that's hyperdimensional that projects the illusion of being aliens in order to somehow culturally manipulate us in some way. And that is why, for example, why as history has progressed, maybe many centuries ago, they would show up in what looked like wooden ships in the sky because that's what people knew. They knew wooden ships. And then nowadays, they might show up as like flying saucers or discs because maybe that is what maybe that's what the Nazi scientists were working on and American scientists. So they're trying to mimic what the latest advanced technology is and masquerade themselves as that. But the thing is, there's many shapes that even going back in history, like a lot of those paintings from the Renaissance period, you look up, you look in the painting, you see someone looking up at this crazy craft in the sky, and it's a flying saucer, and that was centuries ago. So it's not necessarily that the shapes have always evolved over time; they have shown up in the past, and I think it's only if you use selective evidence that it seems like it has changed.
It might just be the nature of the physics that's required to, use some sort of generate some sort of an electromagnetic field that warps space time. It's like if you read, I think Lou Elizondo's latest book, Imminent, right? He
Mhm.
posits that the reason cigar shaped craft are shaped that way is in order to stabilize it, you have to create a warp bubble on either end. Same thing with triangular craft. You have to create 3 or 4 warp bubbles, right, in order to keep the entire craft within it. And then saucer shaped, you kind of just have one kind of warp bubble, and then that's
Mhm.
why they appear to move around at such speeds. It's because there's a relative differential in space time between on the inside versus on the outside. So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just
No,
wanted to
you're
throw in
totally
that comment.
right. Yeah, totally right. I mean, the technology does dictate the shape, just like with airplanes, right? If you're gonna use aerodynamic principles, you have to use some sort of airfoil, like a wing or something, right? Now, in the case, for example, the typical flying saucer shape, it's symmetrical. It's radially symmetrical, but it's flat, relatively flat on the bottom. And that has certain advantages if you're using, let's say, high voltage capacitors that need a big level of surface area in order to generate a gravitational wave field that can be summed together. So, there's principles behind why a shape has to be a certain way. Yeah, but so to kind of tie it back to what we're talking about, I was explaining what led to the origins of the dark state. And I would say it happened during the 1800s, especially the early 1900s, once Nikola Tesla was doing a lot of his more esoteric experiments with death ray beams and even some anti-gravity stuff, free energy.
And spirit radio, that's another creepy one, right?
Yeah, that was Edison with his spirit radio, and Tesla also had
Oh,
a
it's
spirit
Edison.
radio.
Sorry.
Yeah, it was both actually.
Tesla had one
Both.
too. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
They both had some. And Tesla said that he would be listening to his radio all the time, and there'd be voices on it, and he couldn't tell what they were saying because it wasn't English, but he knew that something was communicating. And I mean, this is Tesla, right? It's not some crazy dude in a gutter somewhere. This is the guy who invented AC electricity. Our lights are running on his systems right now. He was a smart.
Right.
He was a smart dude, so he wasn't lying about that, I don't think. And he was probably picking up on, I don't know if it's even radio waves or some sort of longitudinal scalar wave transmission that other beings could have been, maybe even a parallel timeline that was bleeding through. It's hard to say, but there was a lot of interesting technological stuff going on back then, including leading up, of course, to World War II and the Manhattan Project. I mean, we know that the nuclear bomb projects back then, they're so secret that even the people that were working in the projects didn't know what they were working on necessarily, right? Because it was compartmentalized. So each person would go into their work every day, work on this little widget, not knowing that it was for an atomic bomb. Now, even before then, a couple of years before that, 1943, there was the so-called Philadelphia experiment. And that's where
is that real? I hear mixed, some people say it actually happened. Other people say it's just apocryphal. Yeah.
Right. See, I believe that something happened, but it was probably embellished, and it's kind of like a game of telephone over time. So some of the details might be warped, no pun intended. But there's something to it for sure, because one of my mentors was a retired nuclear Navy engineer who sent me a ton of books when I was a teen. So that's how I got up to speed on a lot of this alternative physics stuff and conspiracy material. But he was old by that point, and he knew people that were in that project. So he says, that were involved in it. And this is back in the early 40s. But the point is that even back then, there was a lot of secret government black ops activity involving, anti-gravity work and free energy work and scalar energy transmissions and so on. And you can imagine how once someone gets involved in that level of technological development, their outlook on life changes. Their outlook on Earth and society and culture, it changes, because you start seeing more far-ranging things. And you also start realizing that a lot of this surface politics stuff is really a sham, and that the ones who have the real power are the ones that have the real technology and that keep themselves hidden so that they don't become targets, right? That's where the real center of power is. Like, if you can point to someone, let's say like people that point at the Illuminati or, some sort of conspiracy group, if you can point at them, then most likely they're not the ones that are truly in power.
So how does one become a member of this club? Or are they already kind of been siphoned off and they kind of have their own societies,
Right.
etc.? Like, how does it work?
It's kind of like a river that different tributaries flow into. So there's different sources that flow into it. For example, you can be born into it. Maybe your father, your grandfather, or someone was in one of these projects. And so because you are still within that lineage, it's kind of like nepotism. You kind of get inducted into it.
Oh, great. So I'm sure the best and smartest people are part of it.
Yeah, right. Maybe not in all cases, right? So now,
probably not in most cases. Sorry, I was being sarcastic, but yeah.
Yeah. So another thing to consider, however, is that in the late 1800s, or actually even a little bit closer towards the middle, there were also a lot of spiritualist, esoteric, hermetic, theosophical society people,
like Madame Blavatsky, the Theosophist Society, or whatever it's called.
Yeah, like right. That. Exactly. So there were people back then who were involved in the very cutting edge of human potential and knowledge and experience. They were the ones that were digging into paranormal phenomena, contacting spirits on the other side, and so on. And some of them were I mean, let's face it, some of them were industrialists, scientists, biologists. There were people that were really smart on the technical side. And back then, there wasn't as much of a stigma as it is nowadays for a scientist to get involved in paranormal alternative type research. Because back then, people were a little bit more open minded, and the academic control system hadn't fully kicked in to the degree that it has during the 20th century. So back then, in the 1800s, there were these groups that not only were involved in trying to train themselves on psychic powers and experiment with paranormal phenomena, but also to work with alternative physics as best as they knew. And some of that, I mean, that's one of the groups I think that got started in the mystery airship sightings, like building some of those ships and testing it. So when we talk about those ships back then, we're not talking about, just a purely scientific government body that is investigating these things. No, we're talking about occult groups, secret societies, people that already had an existing ethos to explore the unconventional and to figure out the true mysteries of reality as best as they could with the technology that they had. So with that kind of culture, you can imagine how that culture over time, as more and more knowledge and technology is added to it, it would start diverging from the mainstream viewpoint, which is, we only have electricity and fossil fuels and nuclear power, and that's it. And, Democrats versus Republicans, and that's all it's really about. That's all like professional wrestling on the surface. Meanwhile, you have these deeper groups with way more knowledge, and not only knowledge, but also I would say alliances. Because remember just now when I was talking about these groups trying to contact beings beyond the veil, whether it's deceased spirits or even what ended up probably being aliens, but maybe at the time they thought they were just some sort of, spirit that they could summon because they didn't know about extraterrestrial stuff yet. And don't forget, in Germany during the 1920s and 1930s, there were also these occult groups doing
like
a lot
Rudolf Steiner and folks like that.
Yeah, even more so. I'm talking about the predecessors to the Nazis, like the Vril Society and the Tula Society. So those were, they involved channelers who were channeling Aldebarans, in other words, humanoid alien beings, supposedly from the Aldebaran star system. And some of these groups, they probably got in contact with something. It probably wasn't just imagination. And once they got in contact with something, there would be a transfer of information, of knowledge, of technology, and of mindset. That's an important thing. Because when we talk about the dark state, we're also talking about an infusion of possibly non-human mindsets or non-human cultural values and ways into the human sphere through these groups who have technology that is similar or starting to become increasingly similar to some of these non-human intelligences, right? So they, by this point in time, are probably closer to them than they are to us. And that's why there's a divide amongst the human species between those that are more alien-like and the rest of us, which is just, people like you and me talking right now.
So are these people ever going to reveal themselves? Are they ever going to, how far do their interests diverge from ours, or do their interests converge in any sense, in any way?
Yeah, it's a difficult question because on the one hand, so back like 10, 20 years ago, when Stephen Greer was out there trying to push disclosure and get all these insiders to be on video, on testimony, testifying about their experiences and trying to say that aliens are real and these UFO projects are real. One of the themes that popped up a lot during that time was the idea that we need amnesty for a lot of these human secret groups. Now, there was a big push for amnesty.
Not a fan of that, by the way.
Right.
Not a fan.
Uh-huh. But people were being used to push this idea of amnesty very hard right up until about 2008 through 2010, from what I remember, because I was active on the scene. So I remember it was a pretty heavy push for that. And so part of me thinks, well, why is that? Unless at some point in time they did want to come out, but they want to be, get off scot-free and everything that they've been up to. And now if they can couch it, in a kind of carrot dangling way, like, hey, if you guys give us amnesty, we'll tell you what the truth is. We'll give you disclosure. We'll give you the truth about UFOs as long as you don't hold us accountable.
Well, and how do you know that what they're not giving you is what the intelligence community would call a modified limited hangout, right? Like they just did with the with the Nordstrom pipeline, right? The first story is, Putin did it. The next story is, 6 Ukrainians on a yacht in full view of the Russians had a dive team, and they did. It's just like anybody who knows anything about military doctrine and tactics. It's just like, I can't believe some of the things that they're throwing out there are
I
that
know.
ridiculous. But how do you know they're telling the truth, right? It's probably some like element of truth with,
Mhm.
a whole host of lies around it.
Precisely. So that's the issue with this idea of disclosure. Because I mean, a lot of people want the truth about UFOs. Obviously, we want the government to admit that these things are that something's happening, that it's not human. And luckily, we do get various insiders like David Grush and lately Elizondo to some degree, and various others who have come out and said it. However, their convenient excuse, of course, is that because of national security laws and such, they can't divulge the proof that backs up their claims. So all that we get is a statement that is backed up by some degree of credibility, but it's not unequivocal proof. And that's why we have disclosure if you define it merely in the sense of, oh, we've got some government official saying it, but that's not the same as actual proof. Like, oh, here's an alien, here's a ship, we'll fly it around, during a 4th of July parade or something. That's different, right? So disclosure, there's different levels of it, and we are only now getting the like the whiff. We're not even tasting it yet. We're only getting the whiff of it. And that's the issue, because when people depend on the government to tell them what reality is, to tell them the truth, who you're making them the arbiters of what reality is. And these people, they have their own interests at heart. I mean, they don't care
Mhm.
about humanity necessarily. Maybe some of them do, and then therefore they're the ones come out being whistleblowers. But if we ever get any kind of official disclosure, you can bet that it's going to be partial, and it's going to probably contain half truths that are convenient for their interests and not necessarily ours. And the reason why I say that is because if you want to get into the truth of the non-human presence on Earth, it is more shocking, it is more disturbing. I mean, it'll cause you to lose sleep if you really dig into it for the first time. And if that were to be revealed
Well,
to
Tom, let's go there. Let's go there. I'm one of those crazy people. It's like, let's just know. I just want to know. I don't care how disturbing it is and all that stuff. You don't have to go there right now, but we should
yeah.
start teasing it, right, and figuring it out. But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Continue.
Yeah, well, see, so I've had personal experiences with things that appear to be non-human. So I know some of their capabilities, some of their limitations, and some of their agendas. And now I don't want to put all these non-human intelligences into one bucket and say, oh, it's all evil, it's all bad, because from what I can tell, there's conflict amongst them. There's some
Mhm.
there's an influence amongst the non-human side that seems to be pro-truth, pro-discernment, and pro-human sovereignty and human liberty. Okay, there is that element. However, they are not the Hollywood good guys that we expect them to be, in the sense of, oh, coming in with lasers blasting and taking out the deep state and the dark state and rescuing us. I mean, that's like comic book fantasy. That's not what reality is. Why? Because there are so many practical considerations. I mean, for example, right now in America, our population is basically 10 times more than what it could support without even just electricity or oil. So our population is actually bigger than it would be otherwise if we didn't have electricity or oil. And the
Mhm.
oil industry would collapse as soon as the real presence of aliens on Earth would be announced. Why? Because these aliens have technology that is way beyond even the fossil fuel industry. So all the investors that are putting their money into oil, they would start pulling out because they don't want to be left holding the bag when that industry collapses. So there's all these financial instruments and interdependencies and global supply chains that are at risk of various types of new technologies and truths getting out that would disturb things. Okay. And that could have social ramifications for social disorder, political disorder, and so
So
on.
here's my view of that, right? Like the people in charge. How do I say this delicately? I won't be delicate. They're stupid, right? Like if you sat back and spent a year thinking through these problems, you could create a chain of legislation or a chain of global agreements such that anybody holding, investments in oil and gas, their investments are locked for a certain period. And then you could say have some sort of agreement where you have a trust, you create a trust that has some of these technologies, and you do some sort of like a bidding, like bid or whatever, where you can transfer it, a license, a royalty system that slowly fades out over time, but would help those entire industries shift to these new industries in a way that is minimally disruptive. And the fact that a lot of our leaders come out and say, you kind of trot out this argument. I honestly believe they believe that, but in my opinion, they're stupid. Like they just haven't thought through an intelligent way to do this. And it's really frustrating for people like me who are on the outside just watching it. It's like, guys, it's not hard. It's not hard. Anyway, keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Actually,
I had to rant a
that
little bit.
brings up a good point, which is some of these guys, military guys, strategists, and so on. Some of them talk about a kind of dichotomy between controlled disclosure, where you only give a little bit of the truth and make sure that the system doesn't collapse, and then catastrophic disclosure, where you put it out there and then there's all these runaway chain reactions, and it's really bad for the national security of America, right? And you could lead to wars or whatnot. Well, what they leave out is a third option, which is you go ahead and put the truth out there, but you have a system in place to manage the fallout. Just like exactly what you're talking about. If you have the mechanism in place to manage the fallout where people are reassured that there is a way to deal with this truth in the way that, it's not catastrophic, it's not total chaos, then that confidence itself can lead to the time and the opportunity needed in order to create these structures in the first place, to kind of move ourselves smoothly, gives us a soft landing into the new reality. But that's a question, how willing and capable are our leaders to put that system into place fast
Well,
enough?
they're certainly not capable. Like I think that's pretty, it's abundantly clear.
Right.
And I don't think they're willing either, because they're not motivated by impact, or they're motivated by what's best for me personally.
Exactly.
Right? You can see that in the ability to trade on insider information legally in Congress, which I'm astonished, utterly astonished that that's still a thing.
I know.
But yeah, that's actually, in this country, that's the fastest way to become a multimillionaire. Win a congressional seat, and
Right,
just do it for 2 years, and if I did it, I'd be I'd have $100 million by the end of that 2 years.
Yeah, and a lot of them are invested in oil and in technology stocks and biomedical stocks and so on. So they've got this golden goose that they're protecting, and anything that interferes with that, they're probably not going to support it. I mean, why would they disrupt their own cushy lifestyles and that of their descendants by putting truth out there that has unknown ramifications for them? And so that's why, in my personal opinion, we can't really depend on government for the truth. We just can't. Yeah. It'd be nice. It'd be nice.
Increasingly so, right? And I think the pandemic demonstrated that decisively, right? I think after that, there's no going back. And the other thing too is they're also increasingly in control of the technology that allows the management and manipulation of reality, right? In terms of controlling information sources, and without going into politics, we talked about there's kind of one side that's against freedom of speech, and that's terrifying to me, because look, I don't care which side you're on, only that you represent unabated free speech and a meritocracy. If you are for that, I am on your side. If you are against that, you are the enemy. Right? Because those things are anti-civilizational.
Right.
Full stop. But that's what I'm worried about, is that they have the technological means. China's certainly doing it now. Not only can they manage what you see here, etc. I'll give you one example. Have you been following the Venezuelan gangs operating in Aurora, Colorado?
Yeah.
I can tell you with 100% full accuracy, I have no idea if that's a real story or if that's managed reality. I have no idea, right? Because one side's saying, oh, it's nothing. Another side's saying it's absolutely real. And there's no way to verify if that's actually happening. So the secondary impact of that too is, not only will they have the ability to manage your reality, with AI, they'll actually be able to create video of real people saying things they didn't say, and real people will be able to deny saying things they did say by saying, oh, it's AI. Additionally, with kind of digital currency. If they roll that out, could you imagine? Sorry, you've had too much steak this week. You're not going to be allowed to spend your own. So there's a lot of like this could turn really dark really quickly if we don't kind of mind what's going on. Anyway, sorry, I said way too much. People are here to listen to you, not me.
Well, so the thing about that is, luckily, we do have voices in opposition to it, not only at the grassroots level, but supposedly at the representative level as well. Now, whether they're just BSing us or not, we'll have to wait and see. However, it stands to reason that, just because someone is in government doesn't mean that they're automatically like blank slates that get programmed to be now, self-serving, selfish government elites. Okay, that's not guaranteed. Because don't forget, as living human beings, we're not just our bodies, we're not just our brains, we're also our soul, we're also our spirit. And if that core is connected enough, if it's good enough, then no matter where you land, whether in the military, in the deep state, in the dark state, whatever, you're going to have a little pang of conscience within you. And maybe you will start networking with others who have that as well. And therefore, over time, over the decades, you'd be a counterforce to what the other factions within each respective level is up to. So that's why I do think that there is a kind of duality or even a war of sorts, whether it's just a Cold War or not, at different levels of hierarchies of control within humanity. And I think that's the way it's been for a long time. I mean, it's easy to point at just one group or one people like the Illuminati or communists or whatever, right?
Right. There's no like centralized conspiracy. There can't be. Humans aren't capable of keeping a secret that big. Yeah, it's almost like there has to be a group that's separate in some way, right? Where there's a clear disconnect.
Yeah, and even in my research with ufology and the abduction field, the different beings that are interacting with humans, not necessarily abducting in all cases, but in some cases just contacting or subtly informing or nudging or whatever, just on a purely functional level, there are opposing agendas that are incompatible. It's not like purely just a good cop, bad cop thing where they're really colluding in the background, because when they're really colluding in the background, then their actions have a common outcome if you really analyze it, because they're both, it's like two hands of the same beast. They're all moving in the same direction. I'm talking about at a fundamental functional level, there are counter opposing outcomes that are at war with each other, even within the non-human sphere or realm. And so that's why I think this duality is not only at a human societal level, but it's also our government, military, and on up. And, if you want to get religious, you would have to even say, even amongst non-human esoteric beings, whether you would call them angels on one hand and demons on the other, some sort of a spiritual war that's happening. And I would say that that's even probably the umbrella dynamic that is going on. And all the alien stuff and political stuff, that's more like a fractal self-similarity level, a couple levels down all the way up to our level, where you can even go within us, within our own minds and our own bodies. We've got our good half, our dark half, right? We got the angel on one shoulder, devil on the other shoulder. And we have to make moral decisions every day about, do we align more with our true soul impulses, or do we like give into our ego programming and our shadow and our traumas and, being little babies about things and, acting irrational. So everywhere I look within reality, I see, at least functionally, some sort of duality. And I would expect no different within the deep state, the dark state, and also the alien, non-human, and spiritual levels.
As above, so below.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, okay. Part of where I think we need to go as a species is, I think, increasingly our technology is going to be, or there's going to be a strong attempt, as I mentioned earlier, to centralize it so that there's control of, managed reality, right? I think the only way out of this is for folks to develop the ability to communicate in other ways. And those other ways might be some sort of psi phenomena, what have you. And I think most humans are relatively weak or non-existent in terms of that ability. And in fact, I think I was telling you, Tom, before we started, I had a discussion yesterday with Dr. Dean Radin, which will appear sometime in October. But he's actually done genetic research on people who have documented psychic abilities. And there's kind of an epigenetic part of that where they have a cluster of genes that are turned on called exomes. And then there's a specific thing called introns that are turned on or turned off. Genetically, there's really not, in the research he found, there wasn't like a strong correlation with any particular location, except for areas that those genes have quote unquote been turned off.
Mm.
And interesting enough, it is the places where there was persistent witch hunting and things like that inside the Holy Roman Empire. So kind of like Rome and kind of slightly north, people with those sort of genetic backgrounds have these introns turned off. Now you can turn these things on through meditation, and over time, in the Eastern tradition, there's actually a strong correlation, which I almost fell out of my chair when I was talking to him, because when you start going down this journey, there's a very common set of things that happen that people with Eastern philosophies are well aware of. I had no idea, but you start having synchronicities, and then after synchronicities, they start to experience instances of telepathy or precognition, and then there's a very well trodden path that most Westerners have no clue about. So I think that's probably the way. But for me, as an example, I'm so underdeveloped in that area, I don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
Is that a path, or is there other ways?
Right. So, one of the reasons why humanity is in the state that it is in is because we're not necessarily informed enough. We don't have a good enough intuition, let alone psychic powers, to see through appearances. So when there's a politician on stage putting on a big smile, promising things, and all we see is our ears hear and our eyes see, then clearly we can be taken in by these demagogues. However, if we were psychic, we could say, oh, wait a minute, his mouth says one thing, but his brain is thinking something else. And so having psychic powers in itself would automatically create a kind of high trust, high accountability society.
I mean, it would be extraordinarily disruptive for about 3 to 5 years first. But I agree with you on that.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so, I mean, even right now, like people who have issues with hauntings in their house or energy vampires or something like that, there's a lot of things that affect us that we can't see if we're not psychic. But if we could see it, then it would be just as easy as having an X-ray machine or a microscope where we could say, oh yeah, obviously that's botulism, or obviously that's this or that organism, right? We could say, oh, well, obviously up in that corner right there, there's a dark astral being that has built a nest up there. And every night it comes out while you're sleeping and hovers over you and starts sucking your life force energy out of you. Sounds pretty crazy, but a lot of people that are clairvoyant, they can see such things. And there are methods of dealing with such entities where if you do it, it works. And suddenly, hey, you wake up and you're not dead tired in the mornings because you actually got your rest and your life force energy was kept within you. So there are things going on that keep humanity down. And that's why people who are highly misanthropic, who hate humanity and say, oh, humans are just SHIT. Well, they're only looking at surface appearances. They don't have enough sympathy for humans because they don't realize the degree of pressure that we are under by non-physical forces. Not to mention, programming through media and school, subliminals on TV and so on, cell phone towers emitting certain waves that could affect us psychologically. So we're immersed in a multispectral system of control. And a lot of people don't know it. And there are victims of it. And even if you told them about it, some people are just too low in energy and don't have enough self-discipline to do what they need to do to get themselves out of it. And that's a problem. I mean, that's like a genuine free will violation where people, even if they knew, they can't do anything about it because they've been so weakened, so beat down that they can't do anything. And that's why I have a lot of sympathy in my heart for humanity. I do, because I understand that we're up against extreme odds. And so even though there is the presence of spirit, even though I do believe there is a kind of divine intervention that is helping, it's still difficult. It still requires a lot of effort, personal suffering to dig out of this hole. So, for example, if we want to transition towards a more psychic society, it can be done. It can totally be done. But as you said, it would be so disruptive that there would be a major turbulence on the way between here and there. And by turbulence, what are we talking about? We're talking about Ceausescu's
and stuff like that, where leaders get pulled out into the street and literally torn apart. Yeah. Right. Because, I'm sure if people saw what's on the minds of some of these people and some of the things they've done. I mean, you take like the Epstein thing, right? There's a list out there, right? But it's never been released, or, it's not, nobody talks about it because everybody on it is, at the top of their industry. And it's, it was basically, in my opinion, was some sort of a blackmail cult, right? You want to be part of the elite. We got to put you in a blackmail cult. The same thing with, I think, Sean Puffy Combs. That's all gone dark, right?
Yeah.
Right. That's a whole separate, same operation, just rinse and repeat. And I think if elites are worried about, like, oh my God, all these really well qualified and distinguished leaders are going to be, they're going to lose their positions. And my answer is good.
Yeah.
Good. They shouldn't be in charge anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, the only problem, of course, is that to some degree, they do have the general population hostage in the sense that we depend on them for oil, electricity, economy, interest rates, and so on. And so there's a kind of a figurative gun to our heads where if you try to take them down, there is a lot of disruption. There's like a rug pull that might happen where you could potentially face a without rule of law situation, if things get bad enough. And it's not just for like exposing them, but also like alien disclosure, for example. If that becomes out there enough in the fullest degree, yeah, you would have a lot of problems. But then here's the thing: which is worse, living under a lie until we eventually get funneled into the slaughterhouse, or just ripping that band-aid right off, pulling that knife out, risk bleeding to death, but then therefore being able to get the surgery that we need to heal civilization and move forward. So
yeah, rip off the band-aid 100% of the time.
Yeah. Now, see, here's the thing: like, some people say, "Hey, we need disclosure, we need truth," but in their minds, sometimes they're thinking, "Well, just government admitting the truth of aliens, and then we kind of move into a more Star Trek civilization very peacefully." But I think realistically, probably that won't happen. I think there would be a lot of disruption, and I mean, if we're talking loss of life, worst case scenario, 90% possibly. And I say 90% only because
90% of the population.
Yeah, I say that only
in a rip-off Band-Aid scenario, or in the kind of just boil the frog and wait scenario.
Well, actually, probably both, to be honest, because the boil the frog scenario, the ones that are in charge of that, they're the ones that have been calling for population reduction. They want the world under like 500 million or something like that, like a small.
That's what the Guidestones said that mysteriously blew up.
Yeah, and
there's back, right?
Yeah, and there's been other things like Agenda 2030 and some other different conspiracy theories out there that talk about major population reduction if these elites get their way. So that's not good either, right? So I think it's better to risk population destabilization in a more chaotic way, because that's the only one that has any chance of a positive future whatsoever. But it comes out of risk. It's a gamble. It's like you're going to Vegas. You need that 10 grand, and you're willing to lose the 2 grand that you have on you because you need that money. There's no other way to do it. So you have to play your cards right, and then you can make it through. But I say 90% only because one of the potential fallouts of a major destabilization scenario is that you do get geopolitical conflicts. Like right now, we're currently on the cusp of World War III. We're getting very close to it. We're not there yet, but we're getting very close. And one of the first things that would happen before any sort of nuclear strike would be an EMP or cyber attack on our country. An EMP and cyber alone, if it is big enough, I mean, your lights will be out for months, if not more than a year.
Oh yeah, like if they did an EMP attack over North America,
yeah,
in 1 year, 90% of the population would be dead.
Yeah.
Right. And that's because with EMPs, you have, I mean, you're an electrical engineer, you know this. You have generators and motors in your car. Like trucks wouldn't be able to move. It's not just the regular, the grid and things like that. So you wouldn't be able to supply food to people. So people, like, most of the deaths would be probably from mass starvation, less from the violence. The violence might be pretty early on. But when people don't have food to keep moving, they just kind of die in place.
Right. So you can imagine a potential, I don't know, ET contact scenario where aliens come down, they have advanced technology, and they're like, well, we're willing to share it with China because they're the ones that got their population most in check. They're the ones that are most like us in terms of some sort of a social tight control structure. So if they do that, then the US will realize, well, we've got a certain window of time before China becomes the global technocratic, supremacy force on Earth, and we would just be a vassal state because we don't even have the technology that they're about to be given. So, given that the inevitability of that, we might have to do a first strike on them before that happens. Or it could be the other way around, where the U.S. gets the technology and China and Russia say, "Well, wait a minute, they're about to, within 10 years, we're going to be under their heels, so we got to strike first." What I'm saying is there are geopolitical things in play that can be destabilized, even just through alien disclosure, which could lead to, let's say, an EMP attack or a cyber attack, and boom, right there, you've got 90% dead within 1 year, right? So and that's just one of the many different kinds of black swans that could happen in that event. And that is why, if you truly want truth, if you truly want disclosure, I like to joke that, well, you also better be a prepper, because things might not be as smooth as you think.
Yeah, even then, it's more important to have, to be armed in those situations than have anything else, right? Because you can have all sorts of material and things like that, but if somebody can just waltz in and take it, they will. So
yeah, defense and food are the two primary things you need more than anything.
Sorry, I'm just putting up a bunch of these. People are loving on Tom, so I just wanted to, make sure I put that up there.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'm glad so many people are watching. So shout out to all you guys. Thanks for being here.
All right. So how do you think this is going to progress? Like, what's the deal with this 2026, 2027 timeline that people keep throwing out there? Do you think it has any significance, or is it just...
Well, so, the easiest way to predict the future is just to look at current trends and extrapolate them, try to get an idea of the timeline. So if we look at Europe right now, for example, Europe and Poland and other places, they're moving jet fighters into tunnels in order to withstand any sort of nuclear strike. And they're starting to move all the pieces into position in order to wage...
Taiwan?
And Taiwan as well. So right now I'm just talking about Russia versus NATO. Okay, so Russia versus NATO, that situation is, it's getting bad. Like, we don't see it in the news unless you really look for it, but it's getting like this close to popping off. And if that happens, as I mentioned, we would probably get some sort of a EMP or cyber strike at minimum here in the US, not to mention all the different sleeper cells that are here that can just take out a couple power distribution stations, and there goes our electric grid for months, if not years.
I think there's been 6 or 7 attacks with snipers on key substations. So in the United States, someone, I don't know who, has been probing for quite some time, but all you need to do is take out a few of those critical substations and you have a big, big problem. The other issue is when it comes to transformers, like the big electrical equipment, electrical transformers, they're all made in China now. There's none made here. So there's other things too. Like, we've forgotten how to do things. We haven't tested a nuclear weapon since 1992.
Yeah.
I don't think the Russians have since 1991. Right. So we don't even know if our weapons work anymore. I mean, I'm sure at Lawrence Livermore, they do a ton of simulations and things like that, but we don't know. And the other thing too is there's some parts of these nuclear weapons that they don't even know how to machine anymore, because they were designed in a different time and place by companies that probably no longer exist. So it's almost like at the same time that we're having all these rapid technological advancements, having a geopolitical situation that's probably the most unstable since the end of the Cold War. And also, when you have all these rapid technological advances, you also have people who are being placed in a position for reasons other than merit. So you're having planes that are falling out of the sky, right? Not yet, but you're having parts, right, that are falling out of the sky. And people don't remember how to do a lot of these things. So we're entering, and you have the baby boomers who are retiring. The population, while still growing, it is slowing because people aren't having any children anymore. So you're also looking at a future economic contraction in the sense that you need people, you need to have a growing population to sustain this kind of never-ending economic growth. So absent all of this stuff with the dark state, just the trends that on the surface clown show, right, are not looking great right now. Not
Yeah.
looking great at all.
Right. And these are the trends that are pretty obvious in the news or different research papers if you dig into them. Now, I will say that on the plus side, I do believe there are positive trends as well. However, they are not as visible. So they're more low key, you know? And so that's the issue, that we do get a relatively one-sided view just from watching the news. It is pretty bad. However, it tends to obscure some of these hidden positive things which we can't prove they exist yet, but they might be there, and it might actually cause the future to be, maybe not as bad as we think, but very different from how we think. That's the thing. See, like a lot of people think that, well, if there are positive forces, if there are good people in government and so on, they will help restore things and turn things back to the way they were, like some 1980s, 1990s America. I don't think so. That's not going to happen because technology has
Right.
moved on, culture has moved on. So we're not going to go backwards. What's going to happen is we will go forwards in a new positive direction versus what we've had before. And so this gets into something that I have enjoyed talking about previously, which is the whole like age of Aquarius idea. Just the idea that even just historically, if you look at different astrological cycles going thousands and thousands of years back,
The age of Aquarius, basically.
yeah, yeah. So we've been in the age of Pisces for over 2,000 years now, pretty much. Just before the birth of Jesus and that whole time period. So we've been in this Piscean age, and that does correlate with the general thrust of civilization and religion during this time. So if you look at all the astrological traits of Pisces, for example, the more emotional nature of it, the more, well, I don't want to get too negative about it, but let's just say more emotional nature, the less
Mhm.
logical side of it. And that's what we have seen. However, now moving closer into Aquarius, we can see how technology is really picking up and how the idea of networking, like social media, social networking, that's an Aquarian ideal. So what I envision is that for the future of humanity, there are basically two paths. One is very dark, and one is pretty positive. But both of them are going to have traits of Aquarius in the sense that there will be an interest in the consciousness, the spirit, the soul. There will be an interest in technology and more networking, more humanitarian kind of collective kind of things. But in the dark sense, that can mean what? That can mean like some sort of matrix, hive mind, transhumanism, Neuralink, brain interfaces,
Mhm.
and so on. That's one potential. And then the other one is more like a kind of positive, careful use of technology towards spiritual pursuits, where things become more like what we envision positive aliens could be like, I guess you could say. So that's one
And
direction.
the two things that separate those two visions, right? I'm just riffing with you right now. Is one is the positive one is bottoms up driven. The hive mind is tops down
Mhm.
driven. So what that's going to require for people, everyone in this audience, everyone kind of beyond this audience, is that we all need to learn how to be self-reliant. Like your government, even under the best of intentions, is not going to come to save you. Only you can save yourself. As the esteemed Benjamin Franklin once said, God helps those who help themselves. And I'm not talking in the Ayn Rand sort of, objectivist kind of philosophy. I'm just talking about make sure that you can take care of yourself in a crisis. Make sure you can take care of your family in a crisis, but also try to learn as much as you can. Don't be a hyper specialist. Try to, as Robert A. Heinlein would say, right?
Mhm.
I forget what the exact quote is, but someone ought to be able to pilot a ship, fly a plane, do like code on your own, cook a meal, hunt, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know how to hunt, but I could probably figure it out. But the point is if you're looking for some external force to come and save you, you're on the wrong path. This is something that we all have to be able to figure out for ourselves and be able to have a little bit more agency. So the way I look at it is if Martin Luther, again, I'm a Catholic, but I think this is an important analogy here. If he took kind of the intercession of the priest away from the interface between God and man, right? Where man can have a direct relationship. I think we are entering an age where we're removing government out of the relationship between order and individual autonomy. right? And it doesn't mean it's removed entirely, but I think it becomes far more decentralized, right? Far more less relevant to our lives, and I think that's where we're heading. And I hopefully it's managed in a peaceful, calm manner.
All right.
But I didn't mean to kind of take you off target because you were kind of heading down a track. So please continue.
I was kind of going there as well, because when you talk about decentralization, for example, when would decentralization be thrust into the main thing that's going on? Well, when you have a breakdown in centralization, when you have a breakdown in globalism, in global interdependency. So you can almost see how the crises that humanity and the planet will be being put through, whether it's climate
There's
stuff
the quote from Tim Beck. He nailed it. Specialization is for insects.
Yeah, tell that to the mantis aliens, right? Because they're all about castes and genetic specialization. So right, we need to get away from that. We need to get away towards a more generalist networking, horizontal networking. Not like hierarchical, but horizontal.
Right.
So, I mean, you can sort of imagine how down the line, let's say humans do develop psychic abilities. Let's say we do advance in our scientific knowledge of the soul and consciousness and the heart and the spirit and all that. Well, you can imagine a time where, because of what we know and because of what we can do, we are naturally in a kind of human fraternity or brotherhood or sisterhood or whatever. It's some sort of a family, like a human family that's not forced through propaganda, through top-down control, like in communism or something, as some sort of collectivist push, but more as a natural arising of simply having common interests, common awareness, common intelligence, right? That's the true way to have an organic, positive, united world. That's not a new world order in the sense of like what we're thinking of right now with like the Bilderbergers and the Trilateralist Commission and all that baloney. This is the real thing. It's just that it seems like it might take more time than we want. Like, it'd be nice if we get it within the next few years, but it might take a few generations minimum.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think we're in the fourth turning right now.
Yeah.
I think we're in the midst of a very destructive cycle, but I think the rebuilding and refashioning of those institutions that have persisted since the end of World War II, there's going to be a refashioning. And unfortunately, the people who are running the show right now are only accelerating it, right? Because they're just doing things that just aren't the right things to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That are infuriating people. They're lying to people. They're trying to control and manage reality. And we're not gonna get there that way. Now, the non-human entities, okay, as all this kind of like internectine struggle for the control of the human species, where do they stand in all this? How are they gonna help? How are they gonna hurt? What are the, I know it's probably super complex, but where do they fit in all this?
Well, so first of all, we have to understand sort of what they are or what they're like. Because if we think that they're just physical spacemen from other planets coming here in physical ships, then you're going to be missing a huge spectrum of their capabilities and therefore their agendas. Because agenda depends on your capability. Like, if you can't do something, why would that be your agenda, right? So if they're capable of something, then that's going to be part of their agenda. Well, one of the things that they can do is genetic engineering, hybridization, modifying human culture just through very, very subtle cultural programming and disinformation and so on. So those things are some of the major components of the negative alien agenda, alien in quotes, whatever they are, whether they're interdimensional or what, right? So some of them, they seem to be, as best as I can tell, I don't know if they're native or if they are just temporarily occupying, but they seem to be from another parallel reality. In other words, they're not from Earth in the sense that, if you just dig into that mountain, there you'll find them. No, you can dig into that mountain and they might be there, but they're actually there in a shifted level of reality. So not only do you have to go to a certain place in time, but you also have to shift into like a slightly different frequency or something in order to be where they actually are. So that's where they are. And they seem to have a hard time being here permanently. Like, their natural state doesn't seem to be conducive to occupying our world in the same way that we do. And that is one of the motivations that they possibly might have for creating human alien hybrids. So the gray hybrid breeding program that we hear about in abduction literature, one of the goals of that seems to be to create a kind of liaison interface between our world and our civilization and these I don't want to say non-terrestrial, but this dimensional alien force. So they can't really come here necessarily. They can't really interface with us directly. So they use these intermediaries to do that for them. And it's possible that these hybrids will at some point, whether, I mean, this is planned, doesn't mean it will happen. It just means that they intend it, that they will start becoming more and more our leaders. They start taking over human institutions, trying to rebuild civilization in their image in order to interface us with the pre-existing non-human alien empire or interdimensional network that they have, right? So it's sort of like in the movie Avatar, right? So in the movie Avatar, the human soldiers that were on Pandora, they created these genetically engineered avatars for their own consciousness to slip into, so that they could kind of infiltrate the native alien civilization in order to take control of the planet and harvest those resources. So I think whether Cameron knew it or not, I think that was very metaphorical for what some of these non-human forces are doing here right now with their human / gray alien hybrids. I do think that those are like an interfacing force. So that's where I think things are going. And I do think that what we would call the Great Reset agenda, trying to turn us all into these communist
yeah, that
maggots.
thing, look, that I don't understand how they let that thing out with, I mean, it is as evil. I mean, look, like, just read it on the face of it without any conspiracy theory. It's evil, right? Like, you eat the bugs and you will be very happy eating the bugs, right? Like, are you listening to yourself? You're not going to be eating the bugs, Klaus, right?
Yeah, and then they go to these conferences and they pat each other on the back and like they're enthusiastic. It's like they themselves are brainwashed cult members of this belief system. So we think of them as the elites, but they're not the elites. They're just puppets of something that has indoctrinated them with this belief system, and they're buying into it. That's why they're so zealous about it.
Yeah, and I mean, how do they get people to fall in line with this stuff, with the kind of the World Economic Forum and
right? Well, okay, sure. You know what? Maybe some of them don't believe it, but maybe they're just blackmailed and they have to go along with it, right? That could be. However, one thing I do know from my abduction research, my contactee research and such, is that people are picked up, selected, and groomed from a very young age to play a role in a particular agenda. So, for example, in my case, if I didn't watch myself, I could be on a show right now saying how awesome the Greys are and how we need to give the government amnesty and kind of interface humanity and welcome these Greys into our lives. I could be one of those people that's saying that. And there were people like that. I mean, I've got some books by some of these disinformation artists who don't even know what kind of path they're leading humanity down, but they exist. So I think with enough time and programming, especially subconscious programming, I think a lot of people can be taken in. And they've been put into positions of power to enact these agendas, unfortunately.
Yeah, and look, it's hard for people who don't have any experience with these entities. It's hard to tell what the heck's going on. It's hard to tell who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, especially like again after the pandemic. Like it's hard to tell if if our government is good or bad, right? I mean, there are factions within that have the best interest at heart, and there are some that don't. But net in the last 4 or 5 years, it's been pretty negative.
Yeah.
Right. Like allow criminality on the central, like on the border. We don't defend our own borders, but we defend other people's borders. We go after, we call all the veterans who've been fighting 22 decades of war on behalf of the motherland for, we start, labeling them as domestic terrorists and things like that. And then we're barking up into a war against Russia, and suddenly they're wondering why recruitment's down.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, it's just, you can't make this stuff up. It's almost like they've lost their minds and they don't know how to get out of this kind of their own death spiral.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's the silver lining, and that prior to that time period, so prior to COVID, prior to that time period, so we're talking about like the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, 60s, during that entire time period, those similar elite forces were also up to no good. However, consensus reality was very much bought into during those time periods. And so people didn't
Mhm.
know the extent to which the evil control system was really, doing one over on humanity. Like, like the CIA was up to no good during those years, like real bad stuff. And so the thing is, that's the silver lining. And then nowadays it is more in the open, which is waking people up and catalyzing them. And also it's reforming culture. Like, so right now, especially on the internet, there's increasingly a culture of, well, you get applauded if you're based. If you're based, if you say truth very bluntly,
Mhm.
I mean, that's considered good. So it's almost like it's become institutionalized within a certain part of culture to be the most sharp based, truthy person out there. And once that goal, that value system is put in place, culture realigns with that, and people try to start aspiring to that. So it's this interesting feedback loop happening now, where more and more truth is being put out there as a new kind of cultural value, where you get valued for being that person that does that, which didn't used to
It's a
exist back.
shame. It's a shame that it used to be a cultural value before that, where
Yeah.
you had George Washington, right? I can never tell a lie. I cut
Mhm.
down the cherry tree or whatever it was. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Apple tree, cherry tree.
Yeah, cherry tree.
But it's almost like our people running things would just mouth those things, but just politicians would routinely lie regardless. And I wouldn't even say it's based. It's something that you ought to be in the habit of doing is seeking the truth and telling the truth whenever
Mhm.
you can. And if you accidentally, which is like again the whole Venezuela thing that Venezuelan gang thing that I referenced earlier, I have no way of knowing whether or not that's true, right? Because the powers that be, it is in their interest to suppress it, and the powers that are challenging the powers that be have every interest to say, see, you left the border wide open, this is exactly what's happening. So when you look at both sides motivations in that particular case, there's no way you're going to figure out what the truth is unless you physically go on the ground
Mhm.
and seek reality for yourself. And that's what worries me. Even if you seek to be based in the truth, I'm going to give you a persistent lie that is it has been repeated so often that people legitimately think it's the truth. And
Right.
and I'll back up my sources so that people can check on their own, because they shouldn't take what I say. But routinely, NPR, Fox News, wherever you are on the spectrum, they routinely say that we never found weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Okay? We absolutely did. There's an article, you can check me. It's called like The Secret History of Iraq's chemical weapons program, something like that. It was an October 2014 article in the New York Times where it reports that we found stockpiles of 2,400 sarin-tipped rockets, et cetera, et cetera. But to this day, every credible person will say that. And I'm not making an argument that that war was justified or not. That's a whole separate issue. But it is a persistent lie that we never found weapons of mass destruction. And most people, when I tell them that, they're surprised, and they'll look it up, they'll read the article and say, oh my God, it's true. Right. And then you have to ask yourself, well, why? And the best guess I could come up with is we found this stockpile, but we didn't know there were other stockpiles. So we didn't want to telegraph to jihadis all over the world that, hey, there might still be some free chemical weapons out there that you can get your hands on if you're fast enough. So like Bush and et cetera, just allowed the lie to play out to protect, other theaters from, people getting a hold of these sort of chemical weapons. Anyway, but this stuff happens over and over again, and it's really frustrating if you kind of know what the truth is. And by the way, it's corroborated by somebody I know who was an EOD specialist who personally, destroyed some of these weapons. So, I'm not just believing the New York Times. I actually know a source on the ground who worked on this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, appearances are very deceiving, and people form their actions and their beliefs based on such appearances. So you can manipulate behavior by manipulating the appearances of things. That's pretty much what it comes down to. Now, not everyone has the resources or the time to fact check
So
everything.
She has a cousin that lives in Aurora. She said it's
Mm,
true.
yeah.
So that's what
Yeah.
you have to do, right? But
Yeah.
here's the thing, like you also have to say, I believe Shelby, but Shelby might not be Shelby. Could be somebody. You know what I mean? Like you could take this thing and it'll drive you crazy.
Yeah, you're right. And that's why, with me, for example, because I research things that cannot always be 100% proven, like in a scientific way. So, therefore, I think about things in a probabilistic way based on motive more than anything. So, we're thinking more like a detective than a scientist. Because, yeah, I mean, sure, a detective does use forensics, but also has to interview witnesses, has to put pieces together to analyze motives. That's a big part of solving crime. So I think that approach is more useful to dealing with the so-called phenomena, whether it's aliens or conspiracy stuff, than just purely just scientific, almost autistic kind of reasoning sometimes.
Yeah, and still, like we're not all going to get it
Yeah,
right. I can only imagine if you're a historian over the last 50 years. Imagine with disclosure, like how are they going to rewrite this history, right?
right.
Like, and even if they bring this up, is it going to be, is that stuff true? And we might only be getting a layer of reality. So yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, that is a big reason why society is so divided. It's because we've been given the luxury of believing different things. Like, you can believe your thing, I can believe my thing, and because there's no one proof that tells me who's right, we will forever argue about it because we had to make an irrational decision to stick to our viewpoint. And I say rational because there wasn't that one definitive piece of proof. Because if there were, then you could definitely share it with someone. So the reason why I bring that up is because truth, in the end, will be the thing that unites us. Because right now, the lack of it is what has been dividing us. So disclosure, as much trouble and heartache and disruption it can cause, in the end, I think it will be the thing that unites humanity.
Yeah. So this is interesting. Chat GPT is rewriting history daily.
Yeah, it's true.
You can get into ChatGPT into a self-referential loop if you ask that weapons of mass destruction question.
Mhm.
Because then you say, well, here's the article from the New York Times. It says this. And it would be like, oh, those aren't the same weapons from 1983. Therefore, like it just spins and
Yeah.
spins out of. All right. Anyway, I'm trying to
Yeah,
cycle through a lot of these
yeah,
questions.
exactly. And just to go on a little tangent here, when we're talking about AI, it's all about what AI has been trained on and what guardrails have been artificially put into it to
Mhm.
massage its narrative. And so, actually, I think that's the reason why, even before the advent of all these like Chat GPTs and Claude and all these other AIs, like 10 years before that, that's when a lot of the internet censorship really kicked into high gear because I think they were starting to scrub the internet data of things that would be contrary to the narratives that AI would eventually be trained on. So that now
Mhm.
AI has been trained on like a curated, manipulated database and is therefore repeating intelligently, well, not too intelligently, but is an agent of the agenda that, corrupted that data to begin with. So I think what we'll
Mhm.
see now, I know opinions on Elon Musk are pretty divided, but just looking at it just superficially, he's trying to create an AI that is more truth based. Now, whether you believe that or not, that's a different discussion. But at least openly, that's what he says. And what that points to is the idea that as AI gets more and more powerful, if the world survives that long, you're going to have almost like competing thought forms or competing gods in a way. In other words, AI intelligences that are based on different values, different data sets that are becoming agents of different alternate realities to each other. So I think that could go in a very, really weird direction culturally.
Yeah, totally agree. And then that's despite there's an additional layer of what is the real nature of reality, right? Are
Mhm.
we, if you think about, I think Everett's multiverse theory, right? Are we all in the same kind of quantum timeline, or are we constantly shifting and
Yeah.
out of kind of different quantum realities on an individual level where some sort of, I mean, now I sound like a new ager, but some sort of manifestation of kind of curated, you're curating your own reality. I mean, I don't think we understand enough about quantum mechanics and how all that or at least the implications of it, affect that, because that might also be an aspect of this. We might be getting the realities that we're, where our intentions are,
Yeah,
right?
well, because reality does, as much as I hate to say it, it does seem to function a lot like one of these AI, like ChatGPT, or like a large language model is what they call it, in the sense that, okay, whatever it's been trained on, fine, but your input into reality seems to then cause reality to weave narratives that get reflected back towards you according to what you put into it. Now, that sounds pretty new agey, but anyone can verify it for yourselves if you just keep track of your emotions, your thoughts, your beliefs, and then what experiences you have in life. You'll find that there's a correlation. So if you go through a time period where you're very much in the gutter mentally and spiritually and emotionally, you'll notice that
Mhm.
you'll get an increase in accidents and bad things happening. Even people that are close to you, their lives might start getting more negative. So it's this weird reflective phenomenon, which is weird because even John Keel in the ufology field, he noticed that reality is strangely reflective. So when he was investigating a lot of these paranormal encounters and encounters with aliens or whatever, he noticed that if he came up with a new theory about what's going on, all of a sudden what he was dealing with would start giving him confirmation of it. So at one point he realized he was onto it, right? So what he decided to do was come up with this fake theory. Just come up with a fake theory. And he wrote it down, and sure enough, the thing started responding and started giving him confirmation of it. So there is an element to reality that is reflective, almost as if it's taking our consciousness as one of its inputs and then feeding it
Mhm.
back to us in terms of the probable futures that we bring into our lives. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we are all individually like in our own realities and we create our own reality 100%. I don't believe that's the case because it seems to me more like we are kind of chain ganged together. So if you were to manifest something in your life right now, I would be able to check and see that, yeah, sure enough, that happened to you. You know, it's not like we're totally at odds with each other. But the
Right.
thing is, but you and me both are inputs into this reality system, and that's very interesting.
Yeah, and then at the macro level, it's just like the integration of millions of different human consciousness is, in terms of kind of, sets the direction of the entire species. But in your own life, there are things that are independent for you of most of the system.
Right.
I mean, there's always going to be some sort of tether, but those things, maybe you have more of an opportunity to control, manifest, whatever you want to call it. So I just, there is something to it, though. I'm not saying that I can like manifest a Guinness and it'll show up next to me, but
Yeah.
uh, when you're talking about subatomic particles, when I'm looking at, watching it hit the screen, it's just going to manifest as one particle. If I'm not watching it as it goes, right, it's going to be a fringe pattern,
Hmm.
right? That wave function is not going to collapse. You're just going to see the probabilities.
Yeah. See,
So
so the thing real quick about wave functions is that wave functions extend into the future and into the past. So these quantum clouds of probability, they're not just here right now, they're extended into the future and the past, meaning that when you talk about collapsing the wave function, you might end up collapsing the wave function of something that happened like 100 years ago if you happen to open up a really old book and there on this particular page is a word that has a very high synchronistic meaning for you. What if that word wasn't actually there prior to you opening up the book? What if that is something that happened because 100 years ago, the author who wrote it decided to go with that word instead of another word? So that's a little quantum flip in his brain that got changed, perhaps even from the future, in order to give you that little tiny synchronicity. Now, it's not a big deal because it doesn't affect his life. It doesn't violate his free will or, you know, change things necessarily. So there are all these open spots in the timeline in the past, I think, that are open to influence from the future or from the present, like right now.
right,
Going to the past.
retrocausation, right?
Hmm.
Like time works both ways. It's
Yeah.
not unidirectional, and
Right.
I think the physics kind of shows that. It's hard to figure it out with our or try to understand it with our monkey brains. So Richard Wilson has a question for you. He's asking if there's a simple free energy generator that an average tinkerer could build.
See, it depends on how simple or what do you mean by simple? Because if you're someone who's good with building things, then maybe, right? But if you're someone who's not, then it would be very difficult. So my answer to that is there are different approaches to free energy generators. I think the most reliable ones are the ones that use plasmas or high voltage pulses that go out in a radial way. And I mean, there's physics reasons for that. It's in the equations, and I don't want to like bore everyone with that. But just to say that if you look into plasma stuff, for example, then that is one. However, plasma is not an average tinker kind of thing because you need vacuum pumps and evacuated tubes and so on. So it's difficult. So there's that. And then there's also magnet type generators. However, a lot of the videos that you find online of magnet generators, you have to be very careful because those are the easiest ones to fake. And I've caught so many fakes over the years where, oh, look, it's running by itself, but you see like a little fishing line looped around the axis where, it's like being driven off screen by another motor or something like that. So it's like a lot of these things are magic tricks. So you can waste a lot of money and a lot of time pursuing some of these generators. But I will say this. I will say that over time, there has been an increasing pressure and assistance almost from beyond to get the legit free energy inventors out there. So you're going to start seeing more and more of these legit things coming to the fore. So if you just keep your eyes open, you'll start noticing the ones that are more legit. But to answer your question, look into, for example, the Paulo Correa, Correa type devices, the plasma generators. The Koreas, I mean, it's him and his wife. Man, they are legit. Like they know what they're doing. There's that. And what else? The Edwin Gray stuff, that's real from what I can tell, and so on. So just go to rexresearch.com. So rexresearch.com, and go click on the Civilization Kit, and there you've got like a huge index, like a database of all these articles of all these different fringe inventions. And some of them are probably fake. Maybe they weren't what they thought they were, but there's a lot of legit stuff in there as well. So just check that out.
I have to read this because it's so inspired. It just says, what if Sean's background suddenly dropped and he was overlooking a burning pit where orphans mine mercury rock in the dull glow of open lava nests? I think that would be great. Anyway, that I thought that was inspired. I would have to remove the orphans because I'm sure it would break some YouTube like child something or whatnot. But
yeah, replace them with like little gray aliens or something. That'd be entertaining.
Like little gray children or something. But all right, so what do you think is gonna? How does the next decade proceed? Is this gonna quicken, or are we gonna be part of this kind of miasma, this kind of stagnant miasma for?
Yeah. Well, so the thing is, when you're talking about, for example, the open borders and places like San Francisco becoming almost like the lower astral plane with people walking around like zombies in a drug stupor, that is not sustainable. It can't go on forever. Okay. Now, one of two things will happen. Either it will defeat us in the sense that we will all be drugged up zombies in a stupor, or there's going to be an extreme backlash against it. And that's one of the things that I've been warning people about, which is that a lot of this, I don't even want to call it leftist. Let's call it authoritarian. A lot of this authoritarian stuff.
Yeah, it's totalitarian stuff.
Yeah. A lot of it is, it's too out in the open, and it is too in everyone's faces, and people are getting sick of it. So the demographic of people that are tired of it is growing every single day. Because every single day, it seems like the news media, alternative media especially, is feeding us a nicely packaged injustice or hypocrisy or some degeneracy that's going on that we just like, it makes us want to gag. Okay. And so if you're gagging at that stuff, you can be guaranteed that there's other people that are also gagging at it. And the thing that does is it builds a kind of social, political, cultural pressure for solutions against that. Now, that's very dangerous because early 1900s Germany, that's the same thing that led to what happened in Germany. Is there's a lot of degeneracy and people being taken advantage of in Germany because they lost World War I and they're under the Versailles Treaty and they're really upset they're highly demoralized. But hitting that rock bottom is what allowed something else to come in as the solution, and people went nuts for it because it was like, make Germany great again, and voila, we have the 1940s. So we have to watch out for that. Now, just because something follows a similar trajectory in the sense of saying make America great again does not mean it's necessarily like early 1940s Germany. All it means is that it's possible that there are certain forces, government forces, intelligence groups or whatever, that know that formula works. Might even be using it for a positive purpose. So, don't like conflate the modern thing necessarily with the early German stuff. because it might be it's a similar method towards different ends, So that's why I'm still sort of optimistic about it. However, let's say that doesn't happen. Let's say that we're in 2025 and Kamala is president. She can barely speak and things are just getting worse and worse and worse. Well, I think at that point, if there is no so-called help from above, whether it's divine stuff or government stuff or whatever, then it will fall upon the people. And once people realize that it falls upon them, that's where you get the potential for any sort of civil war situation or just an insurgency or some sort of organized resistance against authority.
I don't even think that. I think if people just stop paying taxes, that would cause enough of a.
Oh yeah, it's going to be everything. It's going to be broad spectrum. Like it doesn't have to necessarily be like a Civil War movie. It can just be civil disobedience of some sort, whether it's a tax rebellion or some sort of a social political thing. But you would probably see some degree of breakdown of the social order as we see it right now, and so eventually it will still hit a singularity point, and then there will be something beyond it that could be positive, but there's a dark tunnel that you'll have to go through, so we can get the revolution either now or we can get it, a couple years from now. That's what I think.
Yeah, I think if the powers that be, if you have kind of a totalitarian regime, right? Either one, I'm not, let's just say they, if one side kind of does what they say they're going to do, basically by definition, a totalitarian regime. I'm not going to say which one it is, but let's say the other side might just decide to turn that way, right? But either way, if they go kind of totalitarian, what you will see is people will start to solve their own problems. Mm-hmm. And as they do that, it is how that regime chooses to respond to that kind of self-help sort of mentality. If they choose to crack down, then they will get kind of the worst case scenario. If they choose to kind of ignore it or to enable it and kind of push away from this totalitarianism, we have a chance of getting out of this with some level of I wouldn't say ease, but with minimal disruption. Right. What I'm worried about, though, is every time the government has been caught doing something, they double down, right? And it's not a healthy, because they're worried about losing power, but in doing so, they make the argument for why they should lose power. So I'm hoping that calmer heads prevail, and I don't think anybody should overreact. I think we just need to be very methodical. What's the word I'm looking for? Methodical about how we respond to, what we're going to increasingly see as a lot more gross injustices. And it's just lying to the media. Let's abstract ourselves from political parties, but to call someone a liar for saying something that was true, right? Like, Harris was never the border czar. You're lying. She was. Yeah. And it's just like, it's almost like they're lying to our faces, and they don't care, right? And I don't know if they realize that or if they, but I don't know. Well, there's the other risk too, that you have these things show up and people are like, I'm with you. Mm-hmm. You're better than what we have. Right. So I'm on your side now.
Yeah.
that.
Right. That is sort of where things are pointing, in that we do have just mass exposure of incompetence in human leadership. And people are getting very upset with the system. Especially if things are taken to some degree of war, even an EMP attack or cyber attack or something that causes very great difficulty for a lot of people's lives. When that happens, what are people still going to be trusting in human authority? I don't think so. I think if an alternative were presented, they would probably they'd probably go for it. Like a lot of people would. So then at that point, it's no longer like political fighting. Now we're talking about ideological allegiances and wars and infowars between different alien factions, if there's more than one that shows up, which could get very, tense and interesting and exciting, depending on how masochistic you are. But
I've had enough excitement in my lifetime.
yeah,
I kind of just want things to be quiet and have people be a little bit less crazy, particularly at the the heads of government. So, are there any factions that are kind of the good guys, at least on the non-human side?
yeah, that's a controversial question, and it's one that comes up a lot, especially in the ufology circles nowadays, like on Twitter, for example. I mean, that question comes up all the time. And some people, of course, they believe in the Pleiadians and the Lyrans and Tagetans or whatever. And I think a lot of that is probably New Age fantasy, to be blunt. I think a lot of that's New Age fantasy because when they are in contact with these beings, they don't respond with a hammer of discernment and truth. They respond with a sappy, gooey, new agey kind of emotionalism that isn't necessarily helpful to us being more sovereign, more discerning, more pro-truth, right? So it seems almost like it's like a cult-like pacification that is happening, like a tranquilization, like a tranquilizer dart to the neck. That's what a lot of these so-called, good sources out there are like. And I think it's because they are playing into people's naivete about what positive forces are actually like. Like we think of it more from a comic book perspective through Marvel entertainment, that sort of thing. So we're conditioned to think of these non-human good guys like that, when in truth they are more like they operate more like a military or intelligence agency that is trying to do good, but I mean they're very discreet about what they do. Like you're not going to see the CIA walking down the street marching. You're never going to see that. They're like in the shadows. They've got undercover people everywhere. So I think these positive forces, if you want to know who they are and what they operate like, most likely you will never know that it's actually them, because they're very discreet, they're very careful, and both for their own safety and also because the more open they are, the more susceptible we are to worshiping them or persecuting them or being affected. We lose our independence, our free will, our independence of mind if they were to come down in these glittering crystal ships or something and trying to be all Jesusly about it. I think we just fall to our knees and then what? I mean, then we would just be no different from jungle natives bowing before like U.S. Air Force people that land on some island.
Speaking of the U.S. Air Force, you see this? Is this true? So Jalal is saying the Air Force is serving warrants with the FBI and SWAT now for Area 41 website for mentioning Element 115. Crazy town.
Yeah.
Right? Like this is the element that Bob Lazar mentioned decades ago. So
yeah.
why
Okay,
it's like stuff like that's crazy town. If true, we'd have to verify.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's assume it's true. Then the skeptic would say, well, they're only going after it because nowadays element 115, the only way that you can produce that is through nuclear processes. So it falls within the nuclear weapons program. So anyone who's mentioning it is giving away nuclear state secrets, and that's why they're coming down on them. But there could be something totally else going on with that as well. There's just a lot of weird things going on. There's weird things going on right now.
Maybe there was somebody who worked in a lab that actually did have something to do directly with element 115, and I don't. That's independent of Bob Lazar. Like Bob Lazar may have spoken about it, but maybe there's somebody who knows how to synthesize it, and that information was leaked. But what was I going to say? I just have to acknowledge the obscure John Brandenburg quote, "We're all the smoking hot alien space babes." That's straight out of
just wait 10 years.
I have to also acknowledge the Lovecraft reference to Uncle Dag, or not Uncle, but Dagon. Mm-hmm. Let's see. Years ago, he's on my radio. Okay, I guess he's talking about you.
Okay.
Okay, that's an interesting image.
Yeah.
So, what should people do to prepare for this, a change in reality? Do you think some form of disclosure is going to happen, or do you think they're just going to keep kicking this thing down the road?
No, things are moving in that direction. Now, the question is which part comes first. I think I mean, obviously, I think we're definitely heading towards a technological singularity, which in itself will have massive civilizational ramifications. You know,
Hmm.
like so, like for example, Elon Musk. You know, it seems to me that imagine if you had modern, I don't know, like combustion engine technology, and you're a time traveler and you went back to the 1850s, and oh, you invent an engine that runs on like steam or something because you know how engines work, but you start off small, and then like a year later you introduce, oh well, now it runs on this thing we call gasoline, right? And then next, oh, now we got carburetors, and now we got like electronic ignition. Well, you're advancing very rapidly because you already have the end technology in mind. You already have that technology. That's why you can iterate so quickly. So when I look at Elon Musk and SpaceX iterating their space engine so quickly and just like coming out of nowhere and getting government contracts, it seems to me that they're probably laundering black ops technology, and they're just making a big fortune on technology that already exists. And they're taking it incrementally so that each step of the way they can get investors and people buying into it, and breaking in the money each step of the way. So I think we're heading towards this technological singularity that has already been planned, and that's just one of many many different things, because you got that, you've got like genetic engineering technology coming online, synthetic biology, uh, gosh, what else? I think at some point we will get free energy, but the issue with free energy is if it's just instant free energy, then that can be weaponized very easily.
Not only that, you could end up, in a few short years, cutting down all the trees in the Amazon, right? Why not? I need to build a bunch of homes, and I can run my, buzz saws all night long, and it
Right.
doesn't cost me anything because it's free energy,
Yeah.
right? So there's a lot of danger of over resource utilization on things that, you know, you're assuming free energy. It's free, so you're not really consuming, resources at the same rate. But there are other resources that you need to build homes and stuff like that that may
Right.
not
Hmm.
have solutions, um, or that you just for practical reasons, you might still need wood to build houses because that's how people are trained to build these things.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So
So if you have a problem with government regulations now, just wait until something like that tries to come along. You can imagine it would be like a global. You almost have to have like a global authoritarian system in place to make sure that this crazy. It's not like just giving guns to monkeys. It's like giving nuclear bombs to monkeys. That's how big it potentially is. So you're going to have major a control system in place. Now we hear the word control system and we think, wow, that's like totalitarian. That's like really evil and bad. But if you look at potential information regarding positive alien civilizations who have a united world, and things are really peaceful there, if you really look at what they got going on, they have an authoritarian system going on where there's not that much freedom, unfortunately. I mean, there's more freedom than like some sort of gray hive mind Borg type system, but they have still less freedom than we do right now. I think right now, or maybe, I don't know, like 20, 30 years ago, that's probably the most amount of freedom that humanity has had in a very, very, very long time. So
mhm.
now we're starting, we went over that hill, and now we're starting to slide back into a kind of a authoritarian system, whether it's good or bad, one of the two. But I think we're heading towards definitely a loss of privacy, freedom to some degree. And I don't know, it's going to be a real battle of the heart and the mind for sure.
Well, even I think right now, though, I would say the technologies that we each have at our fingertips are far more powerful than I mean, that just goes without saying, than the technologies we had 20 years ago, in the sense that, I mean, just take this technology here. To your point, while they're kind of clawing back and, shadow banning people and dampening their reach and things like that, if you can still start a channel on YouTube and reach more people than CNN, right?
Mhm.
Like there are plenty of channels that are there already.
Yeah.
So that's what I think is pretty scary to some of these people, and which is why they're trying to, they talk about combating disinformation and misinformation and internet safety. And whenever I hear that word, it's just my 1984 flip switch goes on,
Hmm.
right? We had the Ministry of Peace and the whatever they all sorts of ridiculous
Yeah.
ridiculous titles for the opposite of what they really are.
Yeah.
The
Now,
Ministry of Love, right? Like,
right. Now, one thing to consider is that if humanity is to move towards a future where where we have free energy, we have psychic abilities, we have these awesome new technologies and the spirituality to go with it. You can't do that through top-down totalitarian measures because there would be just too much resistance to it, and I think humanity would self-destruct before it ever got to that point. So then the question is, well, how do we get there then? And my answer is maximum truth, regardless of the consequences. Because truth, and I'm not talking about just about like scientific truth, but also the truth about human origins, maybe the spirit, the soul, what reality actually is. Once certain knowledge comes into you or civilization or whatever, that automatically leads to a cultural shift because you can't hang on to your old assumptions, your old value systems. It's transformative. It transforms you the same way that it transformed the early beginnings of the dark state. They came into acquisition of certain knowledge, technologies, and it changed them. And I think that something like that could happen to humanity at large, where we get massive truth dumps, and it's going to create a lot of problems and friction. However, it's going to lead to an evolution of our culture, of our mind, of our self-perception of who we think we are as a species. And that's going to naturally lead to the kind of social cohesion that we need in order to unleash and responsibly use a lot of these technologies.
Now, what if there's certain deep, uncomfortable truths? All right.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example. Let's say, and I don't know, I mean, this theory has been posited by many different people. I have no idea how to confirm or deny whether or not it's true, but let's take the belief that humans are a hybrid species of some sort. And let's say that some humans are more hybrid than others. In other words, there's a de facto genetic caste system. How do you communicate that? Something as explosive as that to humanity?
Yeah. Well, the problem is once you communicate that, then that's also going to come with the issue of genetic analysis run by AI on the human genome. Can you imagine what we would discover about our own origins just based on that alone? Um, and then, as much as I hate to say it, imagine what happens if you take AI plus genetics plus social profiling of monitoring your online behaviors and things. AI will start linking certain genes to certain behaviors, political ideologies, certain like the capacity for independent thought or intelligence or whatever. And if that becomes a common truth, then humans will say, well, why don't we start tweaking our genes to make us more like whatever the cultural values happen to be at the time?
I can go even darker than
Yeah,
that.
go ahead.
So let's say you have a AI that is constantly mixing and matching, and then suddenly, you don't have bars anymore because your social credit, score is, or the digital currency doesn't allow you to spend money on that, and you meet three people through matching apps, and the matching apps are determined by genetic comparability, right? But it turns out that genetic, in order to make that sort of judgment, you have to have an end in mind. And maybe that end is to have people who are more compliant,
Mhm.
people who are more passive, people who are more, for lack of a better word, a drone cast, right? And you systematically, except for the tippity top people, systematically breed out behaviors that are considered disruptive. One of which is creativity, right?
Mhm.
You might decide to breed out creativity. You might just, not intentionally, but as a byproduct of doing all these sorts of things. So
Right.
AI could be massively transformational. You could also have a genetic arms race. Let's say the
Mhm.
Chinese elites want to have, you know, uh, genetically, design their babies. Well, the U.S. would have to respond. We'd have to have our own program, and we would have to. And next thing you know, what about the people who are not part of this? Right? They become a de facto, inferior caste by
Mhm.
no fault of their own. But there's potential for some really scary stuff to happen.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And if we look at like the Greys and the Mantids and the Reptilians and all that whole gang right there, well, it seems like they are the end product of a similar process. And that if they have genetic engineering abilities, they're most definitely going to breed themselves into different castes to optimize your genetics for each function of that caste system. And I think humanity could follow the same trajectory if we're not careful. Now, what I mean by not careful, well, not careful means either that culturally our assumptions, our beliefs are incomplete. Like, for example, if we gain more knowledge, but it is strictly materialist knowledge, then we will think, oh, well, it makes sense to genetically engineer ourselves because consciousness isn't even its own thing. It's just a product of biology. So let's just, work on the hardware. So some of these tech accelerationists that are online, like these Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and other, some of them I think are definitely going down that materialist route. So they're heading towards that direction for sure.
Yeah,
And
like augmented humanity, basically, right? Where
yeah,
you are, where you're having these kind of cybernetic man machine or human machine interfaces,
hmm
which that's scary because you're jacking yourself into the matrix, right?
yeah,
Literally.
right. And it's based on flawed and incomplete assumptions about who we are, what this reality is. If you're only within that little materialist paradigm, you're going to end up like the Greys. You're going to end up like the mantid aliens or whatever. That's where you're going. However, if you augment that truth with truth about spirituality and the soul and human destiny,
Hmm.
then you'll start building up a system of ethos saying, okay, sure, we might do some genetic stuff, but we can't touch this aspect because that is the thing that gives us creativity or intuition or plugs us into the divine or something like that. Then that's like off limits. So maybe you'll get rid of cancer and disease and diabetes, but you're not going to touch that other stuff that is vital for the influence of the spirit through the human body. So, you can have those two different types of civilizations depending on what core beliefs and root assumptions are built into their belief systems.
Yeah, and I think that's where the gigantic deficit is right now. Like
Right.
we have not advanced far enough on the spirituality aspect of reality,
Right.
right? We haven't, and as a result, this kind of mind matter, not mind matter, but this human machine interface sort of stuff is coming at us probably a little too quickly to the point where we're going to lose our humanity and become more machines than we
Mhm.
are, what we truly are, which is very likely, right?
Yeah.
A life force, call it a soul or whatever your spiritual tradition dictates it might be, animating, a meat suit at the
Mhm.
end of the day.
Yeah.
So there's a quickening coming in terms of where all these forces are coming together pretty rapidly, and we're going to have to make some very tough decisions
Yeah.
as a
And
species very soon.
right. And my bet is that perhaps it won't even be a monolithic thing where we all go through this transhumanist thing or all go through the positive future. What if there is a splitting of humanity between those who align with that and genetically modify themselves in a materialistic paradigm and those who have a more spiritual view? And what if at some point the ones that are spiritual like that, they say like, well, screw this, we're not going to live on this planet with you guys always trying to persecute us. And they go off world. And then 1,000 years or a couple thousand years pass. And now we're back where we started with these NHIs, these aliens of different dispositions here right now with advanced technology that have genetically altered themselves, but in different directions based on different philosophies. It's this weird loop that's going on. It's almost like we're taking after our influencers, our, interstellar, interdimensional influencers by becoming them in a way, in a weird, twisted kind of way.
So the short story author, science fiction author Ted Chiang, I think wrote a recent within the last 1 or 2 years, short story in Nature magazine where it looked at exactly that. It looked at two branches of humanity, kind of a more um, pure version of humanity that kind of is roughly where we are now, and then another version of humanity that was ultra um, modified by AI, and it tries to it shows the AI having this version of humanity having a conversation with itself, and it's completely unrecognizable, even
Mhm.
though it has its own order and symmetry and is you know would be understandable to that subspecies or probably new species after all, right?
Yeah.
A complete separate break, but you have this siphoning off of speciation, I guess would be the right way to describe it. And I think we're at that point where you're going to see, when I interviewed Dr. Gary Nolan, he argued that people who have these structures in their caudate putamen, right, they're increasingly marrying people who have the same structures, and those structures are highly correlated with both high IQ and high psychic ability, right? So remote viewers and things like that. And outside of chance, people are marrying each other who have these changes in brain structure, which implies that we're in the middle of a speciation kind of process where there will be people who have these abilities and there will be people who are current humans, and at some point those advantages are going to accrue to these people. The only way for base humanity to kind of catch up is to do, is to leverage technology to do all the things, the horrific things that we were talking about.
Yeah.
So it's going to be some interesting times. All right. So we have, I think, about 4 minutes left. So is there anything that you want to leave the audience with, like a final message, hopefully positive?
Well, I think a final message would be, one of the big problems that we have as humans is really not knowing who we are and what we stand for. And it is because we are confused within ourselves, not being able to distinguish between what has been grafted upon us in terms of societal value systems and programming and, chasing materialism or whatever. We can't distinguish between that all the time versus what we came here with. In other words, our intrinsic spiritual values that are inscribed into our consciousness and into our soul. And so if you simply start contemplating on that and making a list of all the values and the goals and ideas and dreams that you stand for, you can feel if those are genuine or whether they're not genuine, and you can start separating the things that you're merely covering up your inner traumas and wounds with versus things that are truly resonant with your soul and make you more alive and they light you up, like a light bulb. So if once you make that list, you can focus on those every day and use that as your compass in order to kind of align yourself more with your true purpose, your entelechy, your destiny in a way. Okay. So just remembering who you are in that sense, just by listing it out, that can go a long, long, long way towards guiding you towards the true life that you should be living.
And what should people do to kind of accelerate themselves onto that path?
I think one of the best things to do is to start contemplating more. I like to contemplate in a notebook. Some people have to go for walks. But the thing is that the more contemplation you do, the more you run the world and the senses and information that you get through your intuition, through your discernment, through your judgment, building those things up. So you're exercising your capacity as a spiritual intelligence to figure out what you really stand for, what the truth is, to see lies, and it just starts quickening you and starts sharpening you. Whereas if you don't do that and you just let the social media and the world kind of form you, it's going to take decades, if not multiple lifetimes, to even get to the same point. So if you can focus within, start thinking more, consulting your heart, your intuition, all your spiritual intelligence traits, the more you exercise that, the more you speed up your own personal evolution. That's what I think.
So the answer lies within. And I guess that's all we can do. If there's one person aside from your books, which they can also find on the playlist that we have for you connected to this, if you go to any of those prior episodes, you can find some of the books that you have. If someone's just starting their journey, what one book would you recommend where they start?
See, I think spirituality matters more than just political conspiracy stuff, because political conspiracy, that's going to work itself out one way or the other. But the spiritual things, those are the things that you're stuck with from now till the end of time. So I would say start with some sort of a comparative religion book, so you get an exposure to different ideas, and do it from a guy or a woman who is very lucid about that topic. So my personal favorite on that, I guess if you had to make me pick one book, it would be The Inner Reality by Paul Brunton, Brunton. And actually Christopher Reeves, the guy who played Superman in the 80s, that was his favorite book. He loved The Inner Reality by Paul Brenton. And
Was that before or after he broke his neck? That's important.
you know,
Yeah.
this was also before, but continued to be afterwards. So that was his favorite book, and I think that's a really good comparative spirituality, comparative religion book by someone who did a ton of contemplation and meditation, and Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism. He worked through all of it, and he tried to put the best of each into this book. So I think that's a pretty good one to start with. Yeah.
All right, Tom. It was an absolute pleasure, and thank you for appearing on the Through a Glass Darkly radio and United Public Radio. And we'll definitely at some point have you back on again. I think people are really happy to hear from you. So thank you, my friend, and talk soon. Thanks everyone for listening.
Take care.